Hello and thank you for tuning in and listening to the Mint podcast. It's great to have you with us. We are Sean, Sarah and myself, Dave, focusing on Everton, culture and a variation of football talking points from quick insights to in-depth discussion topics.
Where there is discord, may we bring harmony. Where there is error, may we bring truth. Where there is doubt, may we bring faith. And where there is despair, may we bring hope.
The ayes to the right, 261. The noes to the left, 322.
Destitute docks and Tories starving miners. No, listener, it isn't 1984. A Rashford revolution sends us back to when the Sardana was cancelled in Catalonia, how football fans aren't just fiscal, basking in Bilbao, Phoenix clubs, franchises, General Franco and Everton the case of a community club. It's politics in football on today's Mint podcast.
So on today's pod, we're going to be discussing politics in football and having a discussion around should a club reflect a city's fans' politics, or should the city's or fans' politics be represented by the club?
So, it is reflective of the area, I would assume, dependent. So the fan base in which you're maybe discussing necessarily us as Evertonians, I think would be reflective of our city, which is quite easy to categorise with our as much as we don't like the colour, the big red wall we've got outside of our, sort of the very corner of our boundary. So I think in terms of an Evertonian or even a Liverpudlian, it's very easy to maybe specify how you'd be able to do that, because it's very one-sided in our city. It's kind of a bit like its own little Bilbao in being able to fundamentally specify opinions politically. We do have our odd rogue who votes Tory or goes a bit Brexity, but I think in terms of Liverpool as a city, the question would be, and the answer to your question, sorry, would be more of it. I think clubs should be representative of the city, of the people. It's very easy to say that from where we're from. A bit of a different question though if you're from a different city in regards to that.
So obviously we've got some great examples around Europe, and you've just mentioned Bilbao with Club Athletic there, Dave. When I look elsewhere, obviously big clubs like Barcelona and Real Madrid are very intertwined with politics, as well as Lazio and Roma in Italy, just to use a different country and a different example. How do you think it stands for Everton and its fans in comparison to some of those examples I've just give?
I personally think that those clubs are direct representatives of their community. I think the integration, specifically in terms of Iberian, maybe, and Mediterranean and Italian politics, that in terms of especially Bilbao, the policy itself of Bilbao is it's not written in writing, but it's like an agreement that the club has with itself in regards to being the identity of the people. And I think in Italy and in Spain, those clubs have made that decision to be the identity of the people. And I think that's something maybe in England that is lacking at the higher level. Maybe for that corporate investment, they won't be able to sell it as well, because the Premier League's such a machine in terms of financial money making and marketing globally. Are you sidelining a huge percentage of what we are technically classed as customers for your own business model if you're doing that as a football club, as Everton, if they decided to do that? I don't feel Everton do represent. I feel like segments of Everton represent the city, but I don't feel like Everton as a whole is fully behind the way that a Roma or a Lazio or a Livorno would be in Italy.
Do you think we're falling into a new period of, that 80s Liverpool where football and politics were side by side, weren't they? such a strong identity of the city, I think, comes through that Scouse Defiance, I think, and that managed decline that the city was dragged into with the Tory party. Do you think that enforced political death sentence that we had, and that yet through that football could rise up through it, do you think we're falling into that again now? We're seeing that the city has to stand on its own 2 feet again, and will the clubs hold it up in a sense? Do you think that we're going into that next generation with it?
I would say that it would be dependent on the people. I don't know if you agree with that. It's dependent on the people at that time.
So not the clubs. It's dependent on the people.
Yeah, I feel like fan movements now, because of that corporate structure of a club, that maybe it wasn't in the 80s, the club was more centralised on the city. You know, if you were a Coventry fan, you were from Coventry. If you were a United fan, yeah, you're a bit more global maybe, but you were generally from Manchester. If you were an Everton fan, you were generally either had some connection to the city via relations. But I feel now, so the club was able to make that step, so able to be the driving force behind building up a community just for a Saturday, to then spend the next 7 or 8 days in decline, and then it was Saturday again. I feel like it's a bit different now. The club is more network, it's more global, it's more present on a Tuesday, on a Wednesday through social media.
More socially aware, yeah.
More socially aware, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, those models in terms of something like, and I feel like it is quite different in terms of, you know, Sean mentioned before, Lazio and Roma, 2 clubs in the same city with very separate opinions, with very different political affiliations. Is that something that could be raised within our city? In you know, I don't ever think it would be, personally, as much as I dislike, you know, Petition FC across the park. I don't particularly think that they would ever get to that. I don't think their fans, their base of fans, would ever get to that standard.
Yeah, it does, like, as Sarah touched on earlier as well, both sets of fans definitely fall on lean towards the same side of the political spectrum, obviously with it being such a Labour stronghold, with sprinkles of probably Democrats in there, Liberal Democrats, and Green Party members as well in and around the city, I imagine. Very few Tories will be knocking about. But I'm sure, like, wider the field when you're getting into North Wales and Cheshire and up the East Lancs, obviously that does probably filter in, and they still go to the game and things like that, willing to spend their money and come to watch those teams. So obviously they're, again, fans of the same clubs as us, and I'm sure there's a cross-section of all. Well, now, as you've touched on earlier, with the game being so global now, the outreach is a lot further than what you said in relation to the 80s before, where a lot of the outreach was probably into Europe with away days and things, and at that time not a lot of money flying about, whereas the world's moved on a lot since then, and it's going so much wider afield, especially when you got US-based fans for both clubs, and other parts of the world like Asia and that as well. Obviously their allegiances change, and it's definitely interesting to see even countries getting behind clubs such as like Man City and Barcelona and Paris Saint-Germain. Like it's working on a larger scale now, isn't it? And obviously with the Premier League being the biggest league, they've got some of the biggest governments around the world backing them, not just parties in one country. So it's a very interesting concept. But to kind of hark back again and bring in a question to Sarah, that I know you've got a lot of information and expertise on sort of history in and around Liverpool, and you briefly touched on before with what your thoughts on the correlation between the obviously the time period of the 80s when managed decline was happening under Thatcher, and now under how many years of Tory government, and with the pandemic, things are being highlighted. I'd love to hear what you've got to say on those similarities.
I think the difference between that 80s outlet of football for the city is it was probably more affordable. I wonder now how that might affect people. You know, that it was obviously a lot cheaper to attend the game then at that point.
Do you think there's a social responsibility then to overcome the challenges that were in the 80s and plan for them happening again now?
So and Everton use that as a
Springboard.
A springboard conveyor belt. Yeah, I think so. I think it's perfect opportunity for both clubs, by the way, to actually come together. Because I mean, if you think about it, by the time we sort of got to Hillsborough, the city did feel, well, it had to, didn't it, out of grief and attack from the outside. I mean, it was Liverpool was hung out to dry, wasn't it? And we're still feeling the repercussions of that as a city, as a people. And I think at this point, I mean, justice is probably just about maybe being touched on. But I mean, in terms of that, yeah, I do think that the clubs need to work together. They need to look at the areas that surround the clubs, those grounds, and think about the next 50 years, not just what can we do if we're in Europe in 12 months, you know, or if Everton move and this is the next project. And they need to think 50, 100 years, you know, there's only a few generations, so they have to think about that. It's really important.
Do you think during that period we put our partisan tribalism to one side? And it did help that we were both very successful during that period. You know, it may have not been so easy if one of us was very good and the other one was not, or vice versa, or both of us were very bad. It probably would have been the same if we were both very bad as well as being very good. Do you think there's turning points? And I feel like there is now, whether it's left or right, or whether it's rich or poor, or whether it's northwest, not north and south even. Do you think there needs to be that coming together of the more micro scale tribalism between clubs within their own environment, rather than coming together nationally, which is obviously much harder to come together with people that you maybe don't have as much in common with? Do you find it is now time maybe to do what we were doing in the 80s and align politics with our clubs again, and utilise the fact that the core base of the people that care about the club on a a sort of deeper level? I'm not saying that people from outside the city don't, but that deeper integration with the club, then they need to see that. Both clubs, Everton, need to see that, and they need to do everything they can to represent the fan base.
Yeah, I think it will start with us and chopping down any barriers that might actually be there. Of course, yeah, but you start from the bottom, don't you? And if you've got any problems internally, institutionally, or through the fan base, whatever it is, you of course, there's no point in trying to join with Liverpool and say, look, this is what we can do. You know, we've got to figure out our own problems and then sort of hit them. You know,
what problems do you think that we need to figure out first? Then
I think it's a unity, isn't it? I was looking at moments through history from the 20th century that Liverpool and Everton have felt that they were as one, and I think the 84, the League Cup final, and I think both sets of fans were singing Merseyside.
Yeah,
it's definitely a discussion. Me and my
both
dad
sets of fans chanting Merseyside.
And me and my dad have definitely had this discussion, and I was having a look at it before, and there's something really powerful about that, isn't there? And if you take away all of the animosity and the bitterness, the rivalry, at the heart of it is two very proud clubs in one city, and we have to embrace that and celebrate it. And although I'm probably the last person that wants to celebrate anything that's
them
red, yeah, I'll be nice. I think we have to embrace it, especially because we know now financially. I think this is the repercussions and the impact of what's happened this year will be with us for a long time.
Yeah, I think in comparison to like what you just said there, Sarah, the unity there, and because they're both the same city, so in comparison to a rivalry like a Real Madrid or a Barcelona, it's not as fierce and it's not as separate because both clubs are so localized, and that unity can be achieved a lot more quickly because there's families who are split with Everton and Liverpool fans, isn't there? We all know someone, or we're all like our best mates even, but even families. So there's always hope there that unity will prevail again. And but touching on the Barcelona Real Madrid sort of division and that fierce rivalry under in the 21st century. Coming out of the war under Franco, it's quite autocratic, the society at the time, and Catalonians obviously being unable to do certain things, from even dancing in a certain way at one point. However, towards the end of Franco's sort of reign, and as Spain started to kind of turn more towards democracy after he died, Catalonia experienced a high rate of growth, and then let's say at the peak of 1992 when they held the Olympics, and what lasting impacts that had for the city, and more recently in the UK with London, obviously they successfully won the bid, and obviously London's a strong city as it is anyway, and how that galvanised the whole country and the lasting impacts on a sporting level, but as well as sort of what's come out of that for West Ham, let's say, on a footballing side as well. You can't imagine having something like the Olympics in Liverpool in 20 years' time with two great stadiums, and the sort of economic impact of that on businesses and the growth of the city in galvanising what was one of the busiest ports in the world over 100 years ago, bringing that back, but in a modern industrial way. And surely the clubs being such a powerful economic source in the city as it is, probably two of the most. I couldn't think of any other businesses who have as much money as them pair, and in turn they're not handing out welfare, because I'm living in Canada now, I'll use that. They're not handing out that to everyone who's not going to do anything. Like, what benefits can come to them if they lay down the infrastructure with Everton in the community? Where can that go, and how can that flourish, and how many jobs can that create, not just in the city but further afield, by welcoming different people from different countries and things like that?
So from what I get from my opinion is that the likenesses between the two clubs should be utilised as a bond to create a platform for that change. Whereas we're in this, like, our city's in this unique position where we have two rival football clubs that have the same political ideology, opposed to two rival football clubs that have a different political ideology, or even not necessarily football clubs like you mentioned there, Sean, Catalan, and the different ideologies and the independence strides from the separate, separate them from Spain. And then you look at Bilbao, who are fundamentally sort of, they're what they would call, they call them non-ultras, like they're ultras fans, classify themselves as non-ultras because they don't like to be perceived as that far right. So they're non-ultras, and they fundamentally stand for anti-racism, anti-fascism and pro-independence of their state of Bilbao. The positives that come out of Bilbao would be that, they've got, as a club, they get very high sell-on fees for their players because they're so unique in terms that they have a very small pool of players to choose from. And that policy, which isn't necessarily a law, goes all the way back to 1912. but they don't have. They have a couple of rivals, but Bilbao's estate is a large is a large place in terms of footprint, whereas the city of Liverpool is a very small sort of geographical place, which means that those positives could be turned into very insular negatives if they went too far. And I think then you would move it along. Maybe you've moved away from being slightly left of centre to being so insular, and so we only need players from Liverpool. You become so insular, you become right. So I think there's a fine balance between the two, isn't there?
Yeah, it's full circle, isn't it? Do you think the difference with why there is such this clash of identity with the two clubs maybe working together financially to support the city? Do you think it's because one cannot exist without the other? From the very beginning, it's quite clear, isn't it? There's such a unique story behind the two clubs that they run parallel, don't they? That one needs the other or needed the other in order to exist, but that actually they can't coexist sometimes, can they? It's fascinating. No,
I think of the two, personally, being the underdog, and I don't know whether you both agree with this, that the most recent, Project Big Six stuff and the European Super League, of the two, I think Liverpool would make that step to disassociate themselves with the geographic location of Liverpool itself.
Oh, I agree with that.
And become
Absolutely.
more global. I think what Everton have done in terms of representing the community with Everton in the community and things like that, they've embedded themselves into the city, and we've won awards for our community base and our community charity work. And I feel like it would be such a U-turn if Everton did not want to coexist within the city. And I actually don't think Everton wants Liverpool to move away. I think half of our fire and half of at least more than 75% of my time on Twitter anyway, is winding people up about. And I feel like there is things like that you need, especially when you're in a political environment that we are.
We're going to the game despite Liverpool Football Club, not because of it. We're sort of like
old school.
Yeah, and even though they thrive on the image of old school, they don't really want us there.
But if Liverpool could pick up if they could pick up that paper punch and take it somewhere else, that they would.
They'd take it to America, wouldn't they?
Of course they would. And so that politically, they're there. They're basically using it, aren't they? There's no loyalty to the area. They'll say that there is, and it will come across as that. But do you think, let's say for example, in some strange parallel universe, if the two clubs decided to fund the city, almost like they gave every year, there was like a revenue that came in, do you think that would encourage other clubs to do the same? And what impact would that have on the city? Would it be? It's like a republic, isn't it? But the city is funded predominantly by these two major investors.
I think it would feed into, one of the few environments which can sustain it. I think, you look around the country and pockets, and Liverpool's a very small place in theory. It's not even the biggest city in the north, but I would, there's a lot of football fans, both red and blue, and other clubs, Prescott Cables, Marine. Go even as far as somewhere like Fleetwood or Chester. And I feel like there's a lot of similarities, and I feel it would either even strengthen the them and us narrative, or it would use as a platform. And I think a lot of people sometimes do think, football gets preferential treatment. I think in Liverpool it can, to be honest. I think there's that many people that are emotionally attached to one or the other. I think the preferential treatment of football within the city, you are actually sort of putting a big net around a lot of people in the city. And And then it's the job to find maybe smaller nets to encourage people using different ways, using football as a platform to integrate them into the net as a whole.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept now that I've kind of lived in. Well, I'm living in Toronto currently now. Like, I've lived here for just over a year in the city, but I've been living in Canada for a couple of years. And sort of Toronto's approach to new work, new expanding market. So, for example, Google is built, like, there's a lot of development with high-rise condominium buildings here, and downtown Toronto is looking to get investment on their waterfront with Google to create a smart city. And I always think, like, imagine that happening in the dock space. The infrastructure's already there. It just needs modernising. And those jobs that come with Google, one of the biggest, well, if not, like, that's got as much money as a lot of countries in the world as a business.
Yeah, it's like the next industrial revolution, isn't it?
Do you
Isn't
think
it?
to some extent, though, it would leave behind
It's a great point.
the lower educated or the less educated or the less opportunistic? Do you think a generation of people would miss out on that benefit, and it would maybe have a positive effect on maybe the younger generation because they grow into it, but you feel like maybe people in their 20s and 30s who maybe didn't get the education they deserve due to funding or government issues in Liverpool, that they would miss out on it?
Yeah, I think there's gonna be someone along the line who's gonna miss out, unfortunately, and obviously it's luck of the draw really at that point. It's either you make a decision if that opportunity arises, like, are you going to take it on and progress with the world, or you're just going to say no and just suffer more so, if anything, because you're not welcome in that job. It's a interesting one to call, and I know we've discussed sort of about the idea of Tesla opening a plant with electrical green cars in the area, and there's the infrastructure there across on the Wirral, with General Motors having the Vauxhall plant, which employs a lot of people from Liverpool as well, and sort of Jaguar Land Rover as well. Those technologies, and not necessarily it has to be a Tesla, but that technology coming through those companies and bringing those jobs back that have been taken out of the country and moved and been acquired by other businesses from, let's say, growing powers such as India and places like that. People might even, like, I've seen I don't necessarily agree with it, but, like, upskilling does need to be done, but not in the way the Tory parties are pushing it down people's throats at the minute. But, like the people of Liverpool and the surrounding area shouldn't be deterred from going to progressing and going to university and getting those opportunities, so we can create that person who's going to bring or be a part of that next industrial revolution. Let's face it, like, for me and my family, I'm not 30 now. I was out my parents, neither of them went to university. An older cousin did encourage me to go, whereas if I lived in, I'll use Sarah's parallel universe example, I might not have happened. That might not have happened to me because it didn't really happen. Only on the odd occasion happen in my family, but I chose to follow that path and what's come out of it for me and the opportunities that come with that. And again, under the Tory government, bringing it back as I was finishing uni, and now my, like, younger sister, her tuition fees are 3 times the amount of mine, and, like, how the current government's suppressing those people currently from following that path, which is a shame, really.
What do you think of the Everton free schools then? So Everton branching into education, so it's 14 to 16, I think. If I'm wrong, correct me on that. But what do you think about those sorts of programs? I mean, is it important? I mean, personally, I think it's good for the community.
I 100%, I'm at your side, Sarah. I 100% agree that it's very important for that and more of that. I
don't think they should need to, though.
They shouldn't need to.
But
the argument, what we're trying to broach here is that
it's not their responsibility, but I think they should.
No, it's definitely not. It's almost like the NHS being, given millions of pounds of charitable money, it's not a charity, right? We all agree on that. But if the club are wanting to delve into those avenues, education, I mean, that's the first thing, isn't it? In areas like that, education, it's vital. It's what and it's something so many people take for granted. So why shouldn't
it's interesting.
They do it?
So at what point then would, if say your club, say our club, say Everton didn't invest in those grassroots, not necessarily even football, education, motor skills, disability funding, at what point, if your club didn't invest in those things, do you feel that you would lose patience? So when would your club stop representing the fan base?
I think there's been a real clear evidence of certain clubs in the league wanting to break away and form an independent league or European Super League, or even charge customers to pay per, not customers, fans, to watch the games at home via pay-per-view. Those like little decisions like that, where the fans being cut out, in essence, just for marketing money, and the business has got to make sense. Like, they're in it to make money. Like, we're all under no illusions that football's a business and they're going to make money. But where it stops representing us is if it does follow that model of like US franchise, and you'll have a franchise move from one city to another, for example.
Like it's Oakland Raiders or something in California.
They'll go from somewhere in California to another spot in the country and then set up base there, and then franchises are come and gone. And that I was concerned when seeing certain clubs wanting to break away who've got US owners, that they were going to take the Premier League or the like even like UEFA Champions League, like they're going to break up that. Yeah, they're going to break up the sort of the traditional infrastructure there, create a new one, which might be exciting for them, but then it completely changes the whole dynamic once again.
Do you feel more like a user and a customer than you do a fan? More
so than ever these days, like looking at it, but that I am older and wiser to it now that I'm getting. I'm not.
You can turn a blind eye to the things you dislike and maybe just focusing on the things that emotionally attach you to that place. But I'll admit, I'm at a point where it feels so fundamentally different to be a fan now than it has ever felt. Like, I'm not gonna lie, like, even trying to find a stream to watch the match so I don't have to pay some corporate company the what I don't want to be, but what is essentially 50% of my match day ticket. I don't feel like I'm represented. I don't feel like it I'm not saying Everton specifically, but the part of a larger picture. And I can see why small clubs, maybe big clubs or even smaller clubs get Phoenix clubs. Do
you think that the reason we maybe don't feel like we are disconnected from the club from a marketing or financial perspective, say maybe a Liverpool fan does, just to drop that in there, but do you think because we're still in the original ground, it feels that the club is very accessible? We've not had that transitional period yet of going into, say, Tottenham's. It feels like a whole new club, doesn't it? Do you think because we're still hanging on to those?
I generally feel like
memories?
There'll be a generation of our fan base that will be left behind when we move to Bramley Moor. When we will, because we will eventually move there, whether it's within the timescale that's been set out or whether it's in another generation. We will have to move around at some point. There is no doubt about it. And I think we're all in agreement that we want to be moving there. We have to move there. It's an unbelievable location. But all your worst nightmares as a football fan, as an Evertonian, could come to fore. Like, ticket prices could go up. They say they won't, but they could. They're still a company at the end of the day. They're a business. They could be categorising corporate tickets They could not invest in the infrastructure that they need to invest in the area. It could not come to fruition. The ground could be built. You don't want a Docks version of Estadio de Retail Park in Bolton, Division 2 level now. I think there are worries there. I think we all have a blind faith in our football club that they're going to do.
So do we hold
Everton
accountable then? Is it the fans?
I think we should, yeah. I think we should, 100%. I think every football fan should be able to hold their club accountable. But at the same time, can you hold Sky or BT accountable if you don't like the services? No, you go find another provider. And I feel more and more now, clubs are seeing fans as users, so they'll probably just think, well, they'll go find another provider if they're not happy with us, and we'll have that replacement ready to come in for them. Did you notice?
Have you noticed recently with Everton have been promoting a betting company, and I think we all thought we'd moved away from that.
Yeah, we did, yeah.
And we were in next phase, right? Do you think the club will? Do you think they're listening? Because I've noticed a lot more people actually calling it out recently online. Do you think that the club will listen to that? Now they're realising that we're all a little bit more socially aware and conscious of that. We've actually got consciences.
Yeah, I think me personally, it's something that I've avoided sort of being involved in for a period of time, that I made a conscious decision not to, and I was quite disappointed, especially when we moved away from Sport Paysa. And then this new bit, forgive me, excuse my ignorance, I forget the name of it, but it was a bit of a disappointment when that popped up on my socials to realise, right, it's one step forward, two steps back. Because sometimes it's worse to cut the tie, then you've made the decision to reignite a tie of a same nature in a different environment. You've made the tough decision to cut the tie from that industry. Make a bold, brave decision and go with an industry that is communal. That is, why not? Why can't it be local? Why can't it be something that represents the people?
Yeah, it did. I'm in agreement with you there. I did feel like, obviously, cutting the ties with Sport Paysa, the African betting firm, and then to pick up probably a more, localised one with a better deal. It felt like a bit of a backstep, but I think a lot of Evertonians do enjoy gambling, so I'd like to kind of provide some balance to this. Although I'd personally want Everton to step away from gambling and things like that, and make it, not accessible. Keep it out of the club. I do think a lot of Evertonians, and older Evertonians, right through down to any fan aged 18 or older, would. They do see football and betting as one thing. Like, they go to the pub to have a pint. It's all part of the fun. So as long as those things are done in moderate, I'm not advocating for that. I'd personally wouldn't want Everton to have an exclusive partnership.
Yeah.
I think there's interconnections.
Of course it is. Yeah.
But there needs to be a social understanding, though, doesn't it, of what it does to people's mental health? With football is shoved down your throat 24 hours a day now. Like, if I want to right now, I could put this down and go just turn on football. Turn on football anywhere. I could do it.
Yeah. And that is a big problem wider, and I think it's been talked about more and more, as well as mental health. In recent years, it's becoming a thing that's consistently talked about as racism is still to this day a huge topic, and it should be. It's one of those topics that needs to be talked about constantly. My questions to the pair of you would be sort of, when for you specifically does Everton start representing you as a fan?
So I think once I feel like I'm being regarded as a revenue stream, then I will probably start to feel a disassociation with the club. I would say it'd be very difficult. You'd always feel an association. And I'll use Dulwich Hamlet as an example. Hipster Dulwich, the Hamlet hipsters. I wouldn't go as far as saying I want my club to have a big picture of Joe Anderson on the front of the top, but what I would say is that I think it's frightening. What I would say, though, it needs to focus in on, for me, I want my club to be focusing on all levels, locality, and implementing that globalism where it can. And I feel like Dulwich Hamlet themselves, fans had surveys regarding it, but the main reason was increased ticket pricing, why they moved away from their what was perceived as big club like Arsenal or Tottenham or a London-based club, and the involvement they were seen as a customer. So we'll charge you £2,000 for a season ticket, or £900 for a season ticket, or £70 for a one-off ticket, forgetting that in the current climate not a lot of people can afford that ticket price. So where you're going to go? Well, people love their football and they want to watch a good game of football, so they'll go to somewhere that's inclusive. A big part of it as well was that you could have a drink in the ground. So Dulwich Hamlet do allow you to have a drink, behind the goal. So it's very much the prices for food and drink are lower because they don't have to bump them because there's only a 15-minute period during the game where you can have a drink at half time. Or in Everton's case, the ground is so poorly, the facilities are so poor that nobody gets there 2 hours before the game like they do at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium and spends £40 beforehand or £40 after. There's people at Tottenham have been known to stay 2.5 hours after the game because it's a social environment. And on the other side, there's palpable sense for building something new and the future of football at somewhere like Dulwich Hamlet, like the social environment of enjoying the football and this sort of needless tribalism of, we hate everybody that is on our team. It's kind of, or we hate fans that don't think like us. And the weird thing is that they've made it to a place where you can be anybody you want, but the beauty of that is by being anybody you want, you're all very similar in which you're just appreciative of everybody the way they are, opposed to having that tribalism of we don't like you because you sit there, or we don't like that because that's your opinion of our team, or we don't like you because you do or don't like Jordan Pickford. And I feel like once my club starts to show signs of trying to push me out in terms of as a customer or as a fan, then that's when I would stop having that attachment as much, I think.
Yeah, that's an interesting school of thought, actually, Dave, in the Dulwich Hamlet sort of comparison with like creating that social environment with, especially like Liverpool as well. It's known for its pubs, and you can go in there with your family within the city, and like bring in that sort of mentality. Not the booze inside. Obviously, you have a pint, but make it a family-safe space where you can, like you say, many different types of people, even have music in and around the ground on the terraces, and encourage that interaction with different fans. Like the rugby do it so well, don't they? And when the North American football comes to London, there's all that interactive fan stuff outside the ground where people are mingling, and it changes the whole. It removes that tribalism. In a way, doesn't it? It kind of creates relationships. Well, it allows a safe space for people to create relationships with one another, which is like, I've never actually thought about it in that respect. Whereas the old grounds, the hindrance to them is they are small spots and there's local pubs written like close by. But people are cramming beers down the neck, and then they're getting up for the game, and then tempers flare up, and sometimes, I don't know, certain instances occur, like we've seen even on the TV, with like a guy in the Gladys Street with his child in his arm hitting someone because a fight's going on in the pitch. Like, you want to remove all that and kind of make it sort of a more chilled atmosphere, but enjoy yourself kind of vibes.
I think Everton are doing a really good job at the minute of tapping into the nostalgia and making you feel that you're on the journey with them, even though we're not even able to go at this moment, are we? I do feel connected to them, and I think they're tapping into the inclusivity, hand in hand, the women's football all feels. It feels like they're really conscious of every single thing that they're putting out, and there's statement and there's depth behind it. So I find it quite hard to find a negative or to to feel that they don't represent me at the moment. The community work they did through the lockdown, everything it goes in the right direction for me. Probably the only thing would be the betting thing. Again, it's hard though, isn't it? Because we all want Carlo Ancelotti to stay. The contract is excruciatingly high. We all want James. We all want Alan. These players, they're not. We have to find the money from somewhere, and that's the conflict, isn't it?
The wider problem for me is that if we were to do something, it categorically puts us at a disadvantage to our competitors, and I think there needs to be more structural change before clubs can make their own individual change. I feel like at a base level there can be club structural change, whether there is allowing what plenty of clubs have done in the last 5-10 years, allowing the female team to have the same training sessions, have the same facilities, rightly so, and that structural change is club based. It needed a larger entity to tell you to do that. Morally, that was the right decision to do these things. But then
it's all relative, isn't it?
And it's all relative
to the club.
But I think in terms of financial structure of how you perform within the market of football, I think it's kind of baby steps, isn't it? You couldn't make this big decision, because if we said, right, we want to put a wage cap on all of our players, we're getting rid of like 7 of our best players, and we're probably not going to be able to get another one. And then it's about, right, we're putting a wage cap, and we're going to double the fund of our scouting network to find these players that now want to play for us for a lower fee. Then do we have to put release clauses in on these players because they're going to want to go somewhere else where they can double their money? I think the problem is that everybody's not singing from the same hymn sheet.
But that goes in hand with what you brought up recently about us becoming a sort of a machine of homegrown, heroes so therefore we don't have to go out and spend so much money. We don't have to spend millions of pounds on someone that might just be the next best thing. We've actually got them already because we've had them since they were 12, playing at the academy, and it goes hand in hand, doesn't it? Then we don't need that money to...
But would we get a James? Would we get a James in that, where our global outreach of James is...
You'll get them at some point. Maybe we'll create our own James. You've got to, haven't you? He comes from somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's conflicting, isn't it?
It's a bit.
I'm just playing devil's advocate.
Like that famous Celtic team of the '60s, when they had the starting 11 had every player from within a certain distance as Celtic Park, and Barcelona are evident. They do obviously farm in a lot of players. Like Messi's a good example, but they produce a lot of Catalan players in their team. So it goes to show that Liverpool does have the ability of players. It's just those coaching methods need to stay up to date, and improve, like efficiencies need to be there throughout the academy to get them off the line. I think Everton are up there with most, compared to most, with producing Premier League players that go on. They might not stay within our team. They might go on to bigger and better things, or they might go elsewhere and drop down a couple of divisions. Obviously, we've got Rooney, Rodwell, Davis, John Joe Kenny.
Lundstrom,
I think more. It'd be nice. It'd be nice to see more go abroad personally, and bring back those influences back to even the coaches. Go and have a few years abroad.
Let's not loan them out to Wagner though at Schalke. Maybe let's make decisions better on where we're loaning John Joe Kenny, for example.
And that's a wider problem for UK, British football. Well, English football particularly. I think it's getting better in the recent 5 years, but we'd always have players playing in the Premier League from different countries, coming here to
so
learn
it's sustainability,
the skills.
Isn't it?
Yeah,
it's sustainability, and it runs through every avenue of the club. It's what it's about.
It's having a long-term plan, isn't it? It's having a long-term plan. It's saying we can go out and get this 29-year-old sensation from Colombia, and we can integrate him into a core of local homegrown players, and we can do what we're doing now, which we said in our La Cultura podcast about Ancelotti integrating himself into the city. He doesn't feel like he's not from here. Feels like he's part of it. And I feel like that you bring in James in and make and choosing the right personality type as well. Not just an athlete, but somebody that we're willing to stand up and say he is one of ours. What is one of ours? Or she's one of ours.
Nice. To bring it back to politics then, who do we have that you think could be our Marcus Rashford? Because I have so much respect for him as a footballer, as a person. I think he's taking football politically to the next level, isn't he? Single-handedly as well. I mean, he's definitely making people listen up that would never have listened up. Of course. But do you think have we got one?
I personally think we've got Seamus Coleman's like a quiet community individual, isn't he? You know, he donates to charities, he gives back to the community, he does it to the other side of the park as well. He famously gave the money over to the donation and the GoFundMe page for the incident with the fan at the European game, so I think silently, Seamus is obviously leads as an example. I do think though that I think Calvert-Lewin speaks out very well on issues of race and equality, and I think Richarlison shows good social understanding of his environment, and I think that it's a nice little core of players who, and maybe we're not giving enough credit to other teams and their players, and maybe we're not giving enough credit to younger players who maybe are more socially
I think Anthony
adept.
Gordon's crept in a little bit, being socially aware. I've noticed anyone else noticed
though.
that?
And I think what needs to happen is they need to be utilised as an example, as what can be done with your platform, opposed to just sit down, shut up and score goals. I don't want that from my footballer personally. They get paid in more than enough money. If they've got an opinion, I want them to be able to promote it, as long as it is moral. Then why not? I can do it, as long as it's open that the opinions are their own. I can voice my opinion. It doesn't matter how much money I'm on or who I work for. I can voice my opinions. Why can't Marcus Rashford or Anthony Gordon or Richarlison or Juan Mata? Why can't anyone do it?
So it is pretty impossible then to separate politics from football, I imagine.
So it seems. Sean, do you have any highlight of individual that you see? Because I see Coleman. That's who I see. I see him as like a beacon of what he understands what it is to be from Liverpool, even though he's not.
Yeah, not in comparison to what you've said with anyone. I don't think there's anyone. I'd probably agree with like Sarah. I think everyone should be welcome to the table. That's the only point I'd make on that discussion. Like everyone's got the right to voice their opinion, and they should definitely, if they've got a platform, definitely promote that wider for obviously moral reasons of whatever they want to discuss, essentially. I wouldn't single out any players. I think they should all come to the table. Maybe not Jordan Pickford, though. He might knock it over.
That's very neutral of you, Sean. Sitting on the fence.
Unlike you.
But who shouldn't come to the table then, Sarah? If you're saying I'm on the fence.
Oh God, how long have you got? How long's the table?
I mean, Sky Sports have got a barrage of people that sit on panels that probably should keep their opinions to themselves.
Yeah, it seems to be more
Peter
so that
Shilton's
now,
prime,
doesn't it? Yeah,
prime meat for that type of.
It's almost like they're going out of the way, isn't it, to find those people that are, extremely provocative, but in.
I think that's
the negative.
I think in terms of sports journalism, that's what they do now. I think Darren Bent does it. I even think Jermaine Genius, who seems pretty sort of intelligent. I feel like they're provoked into saying something that is just going to cause debate.
Yeah,
that's it. And I actually don't even think half of them believe what they're actually saying. They can't.
They can't, can they? Surely no.
And it's just prime example of utilising us as users again. That's it. That's all it is to me. Like, I'm used as a user. Like, what's going to make you interact more with our platform? Say this, because this is what starts arguments. Conversations are not something that's encouraged. Arguments are now encouraged, aren't they?
Yeah, it's sensationalism from a media perspective on some of those panels. So it's all tongue in cheek. I never believe half of what's said anyway. With some of the people that say certain things, really, you just want the facts, not too much opinion on this, that, and the other. And people will say certain things just to create a reaction, and you're worth more to them when you're angry on Twitter, writing 100 comments because you're going to see more ads. Basically, it's just making them more money.
I think the city's at a crossroads, and we're at that point now where we're definitely the captain of our own ship, aren't we? And
yeah.
I think football and politics, it's the right time now to take full advantage of that.
Embrace
absolutely, yeah,
the join between the two of them.
Let's celebrate the city.
Yeah, celebrate the city, celebrate what we're about, celebrate who we are, celebrate our neighbours, celebrate each other, and do it in a healthy manner. So, for me, I completely agree with you.
And vote for Carlo.
Yeah, vote Carlo. Falls
Vote
of the
for
Carlo. Conversation over argument. Thank you for listening.
Ciao.
Obrigado.
Stamattina mi sono alzato, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Stamattina mi sono alzato e ho trovato l'invaso.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of the Mint Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to keep up to date with all future releases. We would love to hear your thoughts and opinions, so please like, comment and share Mint is Culture on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Reddit, and we even have a Spotify playlist.